Hello, I am Xarkun and this is World of Warships Legends. Today I want to talk about the new legendary tier, French light cruiser, the Colbert, and I've got a pretty good game to show you in this ship. If you were paying attention to the team rosters, you'll note that Metajerk, another CC for World of Warships Legends, is on the enemy team, and this game is going to end with a tense standoff between me and Metajerk, so stay tuned for that. But about the Colbert itself, I think it's probably good to open up with talking about the guns on this ship, since they are the main feature. This ship only has guns. It does not carry torpedoes at all. So all of the damage you're going to do with this ship will be from the guns. And the damage you can do with these guns is, in a word, incredible. There are 16 of these guns. They are 127 millimeters in size. So they're essentially destroyer guns. Now I've chosen as my commander Andre Roux. At least I think his first name is Andre, last name Roux. He's the more defensive of the French cruiser commanders, and I think he's probably the best choice for this ship. Although I think Fournet, the universal French commander, could also be used with great success on this ship, and he does have some skills that will benefit this ship in different ways than Roux can. But if you want an idea of how much damage these guns are capable of pumping out, take note of the enemy Atago, the first target we're shooting at in this game. Now, he's not only being shot at by us, so he is losing hit points from other sources. Nevertheless, we shoot at him for only a few moments, and in those few moments, we're able to rack up over 20,000 damage, and the damage continues to count. We are also able to pump out 62 shells against that Atago for that 20,000 plus damage. These guns do a ridiculous amount of damage in a short amount of time. Roux, whose base trait increases the high explosive alpha strike, again is helming this ship. So with Roux at the helm, the HE alpha on these guns is increased to 2,184. So these destroyer-sized guns pack a cruiser-sized alpha, and this translates with a 3.1 second reload on this build to a potential DPM of somewhere in the range of 675,000, and that is HE potential DPM. That number, 675K, is astronomical. It is positively off the charts. It may be the highest potential HE DPM of any ship in this game. But of course, that is potential DPM. And the actual DPM you're going to be able to squeeze out of these guns will only, in truth, be a fraction of that number. But even a fraction of 675,000 can be quite potent. One of the things that cuts down on the Colbert being able to realize its potential HE DPM in actuality is the size of its guns. Again, they are 127 millimeters, and that means the high explosive on these guns can only penetrate 21 millimeters of armor, which in turn means that for all intents and purposes, against all the ships you're going to face at the Legendary tier and Tier 7, you are really only going to be able to penetrate the superstructure of every ship that isn't a destroyer. Destroyers, you can pen their hulls, unless they are, of course, the Khabarovsk with its 50 millimeter of armor plating. I think the Gearing has 25 millimeter armor plating too, so it could be theoretically somewhat resistant to this HE, but not really in actuality. And then the Paolo Emilio has that 50 or 60 millimeter armor plate along the waterline, I believe, on its hull. So that'll shatter this HE as well, but pretty much every other destroyer, you can pen them everywhere, and every other ship, you're going to have to focus on hitting their superstructure. Of course, there are some oddballs out there, like the brand new Minotaur, which has 16 millimeters of armor along its hull, or at least along its bow and stern, so you can penetrate that. But you'll notice when you shoot these guns that you get an awful lot of shatters. Of course, any penetrations you do get, those will come on the superstructure, and the damage adds up very, very quickly from those penetrations. Plus, this thing is positively insane at starting fires. It's got a base 7% fire chance on, again, 16 guns that reload in 3.1 seconds. So this is potentially like the best fire starter in the entire game. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. You can shoot at any ship for maybe roughly 30 seconds, and in that time you will, almost certainly, light at least one fire, potentially more. In fact, I think we finished this game with 14 fires lit, so this is a little flamethrower. The range on these guns, 15.6 kilometers, but you can see these shell arcs are very floaty. That Kansas out there at 14 kilometers away, nearly at the end of our gun range, he just went down, of course, but if you looked at the shell counter, or the timer to target, rather, it said nearly 12 seconds. So it takes these shells a long time after they leave the gun to reach the target. That means you do have to give a lot of lead, and because the shells are so floaty and the arcs are so high, I don't see any good reason to try to buff the range of the guns on this ship. Frankly, they're not going to be super effective past 15 kilometers, so no sense in buffing the range is my thought on that. As for the other parameters of the ship, the armor on this ship, when I first looked at it, I was honestly surprised because it doesn't feel like it, but all along the hull, the Colbert enjoys 32 millimeters of armor plating, and 32 millimeters is a significant threshold, because of course, no battleship except the Yamato can overmatch 32 millimeters, which means 32 millimeters can be angled against all smaller battleship guns than what the Yamato has, at least in theory. In practice, the Colbert has a gigantic superstructure with plenty of flat, shell-catching surfaces. So if you do get shot by battleships, it's quite likely that their armor piercing is going to hit your superstructure and do massive penetration chunk damage on you. And with your small hit points pool, you really can't afford to take too many hits like that, so you don't want to be shot. Thus, I think the ideal position to play the Colbert in is sort of the same positions you might play the Atlanta in. That is, sitting behind islands, using them as cover and concealment, and lobbing your shells over the islands. You can see, again, that the shell arcs are very high, and the ship is very good at lobbing them over islands. But if you cannot stay behind an island, then this ship does boast some pretty excellent maneuverability characteristics. With my commander build of Rue, the base speed on this ship is 37.1 knots. But as you can see, it also gets 3 charges of the French engine boost consumable, which increases the speed by 20%, meaning that when the speed boost is active, you can go well over 40 knots with this ship. And that can be good because it can throw off the lead of battleships and cruisers and make you more difficult to hit for them. Nevertheless, when I took this out yesterday in my stream, some people in the chat were advising me that I should spec into the rudder on this ship and try to play it more like what the Legends content creator Tier 7 Hipper calls the Agile Cruiser build. This, I don't think, is a good candidate for that kind of build, and I ultimately don't think that build is, or that kind of build rather, is effective on too many cruisers. I'd rather spec into the Concealment, and thus I have the Concealment mod installed on this ship, as well as the propulsion mod now, because I think it's actually easier at longer ranges to dodge by messing with the throttle and acceleration juking salvos than it is to try to turn out of their way. And even so, 7.9 seconds, I believe, on this build is the rudder shift, going at 45 knots or 42 knots, whatever it is with the speed boost active, and that kind of rudder shift, honestly, it's good enough to dodge battleship salvos from certain ranges. But I don't think you want to put yourself in a position in this ship where you have to dodge those salvos. I think it's just far too risky to do that, which is why I say the ideal position is sort of the island-hugging cruiser type gameplay that you would want to engage in if you're playing something like the Atlanta. This ship plays quite a bit like the Atlanta. It's like a supersized Atlanta if you added a little bit of spice to the guns, increased the speed and maneuverability by a ton, and increased the armor plating, although again in practice I would treat this thing as if it doesn't have 32 millimeters of armor. In fact, I think the only time 32 millimeters of armor is going to be of a benefit to you is if you're playing around an island, there's an enemy battleship close to that island, and the enemy battleship comes around. At that point, you can probably point your bow at the battleship and mitigate a lot of damage that he's going to do to you with his armor-piercing shells, so long as he actually hits your bow. If he aims at your superstructure, you're pretty much screwed, because again, the superstructure is gigantic, very easy to hit, eats a lot of pens. So don't rely on this armor at all. I'd say treat this ship as if it doesn't have this armor. In fact, it shouldn't probably have this armor at all. On the PC, the Colbert only has, I think, 25 millimeters of armor plating everywhere, so technically this ship has been buffed for Legends, making its journey from PC to console. Nevertheless, I really don't think the 32 millimeters of armor is all that useful, and you will be wrecked if you get shot at. In fact, you're going to see me get wrecked here, not being shot at by any battleships, but by two high DPM light cruisers, namely the Colbert over there, played by MetaJerk, and the Minotaur somewhere to the left of the screen. You can see it doesn't take very long at all for me to lose half of my health. So in order to, save myself from this rain of HE and AP spam, I'm driving right for this island to get behind it so that I can drop spot, go dark for a second, and catch my breath here, essentially. Anyway, what else is there to say about this ship? The concealment is not good. At base, it is at least 13 kilometers, which is atrocious, and that is why I've put the concealment module on it, along with Gunichi Mikawa as one inspiration, and I've got it down to 11 km, which also is not fabulous, but is much more manageable than 13 kilometers. I do think that this ship has a pretty high skill floor. In other words, I think it's quite difficult to play. Inexperienced players will struggle with it, mostly because it is so squishy, and because in order to be effective with it, you really do have to pay attention to your positioning. It is not like the Minotaur in the sense that you can just lay down a smoke screen and bring mobile concealment with you wherever you go. You can't do that with the Colbert. You have to rely much more on positioning correctly behind islands and angling the ship. You never want to give broadside to anybody. Unlike a lot of the other French cruisers, the Colbert does not have any kind of spaced armor, and the Citadel juts out of the water quite significantly, so it can be punished, and this is probably one of the most dev-strikeable ships in the entire game. It wouldn't be too hard at all for a battleship to hit you at the start of the game while you're broadside and take away all 31,000 of your hit points. So, the Colbert, a very challenging ship to play, I would say. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, and you aren't going to be able to probably have super consistent success with it in every game. Because of its squishiness, I think it makes it somewhat situational, which means again, you're not always going to have games where this thing can shine. And unfortunately, in this game, since our friendly destroyer decided to pursue that Minotaur, well, there's 60 seconds left to go. That destroyer was taken out by the Minotaur, and that put the enemy team ahead on points. That's why I'm trying to rush Metajerk here, and in retrospect, I wish I hadn't turned out and instead had just gone for the Ram, because I could have gotten a Kraken off of Metajerk, although I think that would have been a points-neutral exchange, and we would have lost anyway, but I think this is a good look at the Colbert. I think it gives you an idea of what you can expect with the outrageous DPM on these guns, and I think it shows the squishiness of the ship quite well. So, you know, if you want to rent it, it only costs 2 million credits, which very easy to grind that amount of credits, and there's still 10 or 11 days left on the rental period. So take it out, see what you think of it yourself, but I will tell you that I think it's a very challenging ship to play, and it is a very capable ship at the same time in the correct situations. Actually, I think it's probably a little bit bad for the game because its outrageous DPM can heavily punish battleships for pushing in at all, and that may contribute to a more passive meta, but nevertheless, that's what I think of the ship. Let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure to give the video a like before you go, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. With that, I will see you next time. Goodbye.